Have you ever thought about the legalities of mounting video cameras on the outside of your plane? And do you know when you need a mechanic signature to do that and when you don't? And are you familiar with the benefits of capturing video and audio during your flight lessons? Well, stick around as we answer these questions and more. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation. My name is Max Truscott. I've been flying for 50 years. I'm the author of Max Truscott's G1000 Glass Cockpit and Perspective Handbook, and I'm the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Last week in episode 346, we talked with CFI Jim Hopp about the challenges in learning to fly tailwheel aircraft. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/346. And if you're new to this show, take a moment, stop what you're doing right now, and on whatever app that you're using, touch either the subscribe key or in Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, the follow key, so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And of course, this is a listener-supported show supported by, people like you. And we've got several ways that you can show your love and support for the show. So if you would take a moment and go out to our new support page at aviationnewstalk.com/support, where you'll find links to support the show via PayPal, Venmo, Zelle, and Patreon. And when you make a donation, I'll read your name on the show. Today, we're going to go straight to the interview, as I need to go straight to the airport, where I'll be picking up a client who just bought a new to him 2013 Cirrus SR22. And then we'll drive a few hours this evening to an airport in the middle of California where he had his pre-purchase inspection. And then we'll be flying the aircraft back to his home in Missouri. And if all works out, well, I'll catch an airline flight and be back home late on Friday. And next week, I'll tell you all the details of this week's trip. Now let me tell you a little about Patrick Carter and NflightCam. He's an ATP-rated fixed-wing pilot, rotor-wing pilot, and fixed-wing CFI, airline pilot, and avid small airplane pilot. He's worked as a production test pilot, airshow pilot, flight instructor, airline pilot, and bush pilot on both skis and floats in Denali National Park and Katmai National Parks in Alaska. In an effort to make flight instruction more effective, Patrick founded NflightCam in 2010. Their goal is to make it easier for pilots to film their flying without causing undue distractions. And by the way, during our conversation, he talks about the cameras they originally sold. However, NflightCam no longer sells cameras, but they do sell the all-important camera mounts for attaching cameras to your airplane, as well as other accessories. And now here's our conversation with Patrick Carter. Patrick, welcome to the show. Great to have you here today.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking about shooting video and mounts and things like that. But tell us first about how you got into this. What was that moment where you said, oh boy, I really need to start making these items for the video industry?
Well, it really all started almost 20 years ago. I had an aerobatic flight school and I was teaching aerobatics. I had a PITS S2B and was going around the country doing unusual attitude training and spin endorsements and working with students on basic aerobatics. And I had a student that I was trying to teach loops to. And we were doing loops and he kept coming out off heading. And I said, look at your wing, look at your wing. And I had this was before the days of, GoPro was in business, but they weren't really a popular thing. I actually had a little lipstick cam that recorded to a Mini 8 tape deck under my seat. It was this homebrew system. And luckily I had a camera right on the cabane strut facing right in the student's face. And we were doing this loop and I kept telling him to look at the wing and he wouldn't look at the wing. At one point I said, look at the wing. And he said, I am. And I could see his head from behind. And I knew it's not like he's being intentionally non-compliant. There's a lot of stress that happens when you're learning in any aircraft, whether you're doing primary flight training or aerobatic flight training. We're in an unnatural environment. No matter how much we've flown, and our brain only has so much processing capability. So when we got on the ground, we debriefed it. And I pulled up the video and I was able to show him with me saying, look at the wingtip, and him saying I am, staring straight into the camera straight ahead. And it clicked at that point, and he flew perfect loops on the next flight because he knew, hey, I'm not looking at the wingtip, I'm looking straight ahead. And he was able to, it clicked in his head, even though his brain was telling him while we were flying. And that really clicked to me as a flight instructor that this video debrief is huge because we all have a lot of stress when we're in the cockpit. When we're trying to learn a new skill in real time, We hear these auditory cues from the instructor, but our brain doesn't necessarily process them. But when we're back on the ground, sitting in a chair, on a couch, in the FBO, wherever, and we're able to watch this video and watch our performance live, that self-critique is immensely valuable because we can see exactly what's happening. And then the other part is having the audio overlaid with the video so that you hear instructor comments, you hear the radio, depending on what task you're trying to learn, you have all this data, and now you can relive that scenario in real time and process everything again without being in the stressful environment. So our brains absorb it so much faster. So that really clicked to me as an instructor that, hey, there's a lot of value here. So I started developing my own system more to really perfect it. And one of my selling points to flying with me was all flights were videoed and video debriefed. And that was a strong selling point. And I think it delivered a lot of value to the customer. And then a series of events happened. We had the 2008 recession, which led to me being laid off from my primary job. And other people had asked me to buy these camera systems, and I had always kind of said no, or I didn't really have time to deal with it. But at that point, I didn't have a job, and I thought, well, everybody wants to buy these cameras from me. I can make camera systems and sell them. And that's how InFlight got started. And since then, it's really been my mission to promote video in flight for instruction and safety, not for other things that we all think of when it comes to video in airplanes.
I am in total agreement with you. And when I worked on my CFI, which was, I want to say 23 years ago, I guess, I used audio recording of every flight, and I found it invaluable because my experience has been there is so much that happens in the cockpit. There are so many little tiny tips that you pick up, and I can at best remember half of them. And so I found that those audio recordings were invaluable. When I worked on my helicopter rating a year ago, I videotaped everything and had the audio for everything. And I bet that saved me at least 10 hours in terms of total instruction time, which amounts to a significant amount of money.
Absolutely.
Just because I could go back and I could review everything. And that just made me much better on the next flight because I was doing the things I was told to do last flight.
Absolutely. A helicopter, aerobatics, same thing. High dollar flight instruction and high stress. So being able to watch it without stress is huge and really, very economical. You can easily cover the cost of the camera and all the equipment multiple times over in just, one rating.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, the other thing related to stress is auditory exclusion, which explains why we sometimes see video of people doing gear-up landings with a gear horn blaring away. They're under stress. They simply don't hear the horn because of the way our brain works. It blocks out those, what it considers low-priority things when you're concentrating on stressful events.
Exactly.
Let's talk about safety. What are some of the safety issues related to videotaping flights?
Yeah, so the number one thing is allowing it to become a distraction. And over the years, we've seen accidents that have been directly related to a camera, or what I call flying for the camera, or even worse, doing things to get clicks on, or views on YouTube or something like that, making really poor decisions. What I strive to do is create a system and a system of accessories that make it easy to set up the camera and then forget about it. I'm not as concerned about Hollywood quality video as I am about, hey, can anybody take this camera, follow a simple set of instructions, a basic checklist, mount it in an airplane, and if you've maybe the first time 10, 15 minutes, after that 5 minutes, you've got the camera mounted, you hit go, you go fly, you come back, and you have something of value to debrief. Maybe the footage is a little crooked. Okay, you can fix that next time. But did you get a good view? Were you able to get what you were doing on your flight? And was it easy? And was it a non-distraction? It's a set and forget and go fly. That's our goal. Can you constantly tweak and perfect and you do this stuff to make awesome video? Absolutely. And when we do that in-house, we usually have at least one person dedicated to nothing but filming. So they're mounting cameras running cameras, sitting in the right seat, making sure everything's going the way they want it to go while another person's dedicated to flying, so that the pilot doesn't get distracted and fly into a mountain or another airplane or whatever it is we might be doing. And that's a real threat that we have to be aware of as pilots is distraction. And it's super easy. And there's a list of accidents that are directly related to pilots being distracted, and even very experienced pilots being distracted with cameras. So we have to be aware of that, but we also have to we can use it as a tool. You just have to keep it lower on your priority list and say, hey, once I hit go, I forget about the camera till I get back.
I'm glad you brought up distractions. The NTSB has listed that as one of the 3 major elements related to loss of control accidents. So distractions is always a critical thing for pilots, regardless of whether you have cameras running in the cockpit.
Yep.
And I agree. When you've got the cameras, you've just raised the possibility for distraction up to a much higher level. There have been times when I've been sitting in the right seat as a flight instructor, and I've been operating the cameras and the video and so on, and I've realized, this has become a distraction to me, and that I just stop it at that point in time. It's more important to focus on the instruction sometimes than it is to capture the video, if the video itself is becoming a distraction.
I've run into that instructing also, and I have had times when I've stopped the cameras because the student has been more worried about the camera than the flying. And when the student starts asking me if the camera's aligned or the camera's this or that because they want to put it on Instagram or YouTube or whatever afterwards, I usually just say, hey, we're going to turn the cameras off because it's obviously pulling too much of their bandwidth to be using the cameras, and also mine as the instructor when we're teaching primary landings or something along those lines. We need to make sure the camera's in the background, not in the forefront of how we allocate our brain space.
Yeah, I really can't emphasize that enough. If you look at the number of folks that do silly things to take selfies and fall into the Grand Canyon because they went over the fence, or I was with a gentleman who I was doing his SOE training in a jet, and we were within a minute or so of joining the ILS into Van Nuys, not a very busy airport. Of course, one of the busiest general aviation airports in the world. And he's up there shooting video, taking selfies, and I just couldn't believe it. And that just totally is not in line with the kind of discipline that we need to do to fly professionally. And when I say fly professionally, I think everyone should, whether they work for an aviation job or not, they should strive to fly in a professional manner.
Absolutely. That's how we stay alive. What we do is high risk. And to me, it's not too much to ask to put your cell phone down, not text, not to do these things where it counts. And the same thing that with the cameras, they're just as big a distraction. We just have to manage that distraction, just like we manage our workload with everything. We shouldn't be briefing an approach within 60 seconds of joining the ILS either. We should already have it briefed 15 minutes prior, all the frequencies loaded, the course is loaded, and know what we're going to do. So, or we shouldn't be talking to people in the back and telling them to put on their seatbelts. All those things that should all be taken care of before we get to that point, so that we can manage our workloads properly.
Yeah, I went to a mountain flying course a couple of days ago up at Truckee, California, and I brought along all my camera gear and recording gear, and I decided not to put it in because I knew it was going to take a fair amount of time. I had it right there with me, but it was like, let's focus on the course and not get distracted and tired because it was getting to be later in the day with doing all the setup and the installation necessary.
Absolutely, yeah. And you have to be mature enough as a pilot to understand when those times are and when they're not. And as a general rule for me, if I'm filming a flight, I plan on twice as long, and I take the risk factor down by about a factor of 4. I do a lot of backcountry flying on my own time. I have a Super Cub, live in Alaska. And if I'm going to film something, my general rule is twice as much time. And then the strips that I'll land on are strips that I have landed on multiple times and can do no problem. I never try to pioneer a new strip with cameras rolling. I never try to go in somewhere difficult because it just pulls too much away from my concentration. Now, if I'm going to film it, what I might do is if I'm going to pioneer a strip, I'll go figure the strip out without cameras, land it multiple times, make sure I'm okay with it, and then I go back with a camera and film it. And usually have someone else with me to deal with the cameras so that I offload that stress from me to that other person filming. Or sometimes I'm the person filming and I'm just following along with someone else that's very familiar with what we're doing. But we're not going out and filming, let's say, stuff that might look extreme. We're not filming that on the first go.
I think that's really great guidance, and that really fits with what my experience has been. I've never heard anybody use the 2x number before, but it makes sense to me. You're talking about all the additional time that's required to get the cameras installed, get all the wires routed, get the power connected to the cameras, get the audio connected, and then to pull all that stuff out afterwards. That's where you come up with the 2x.
Yeah, just a rough rule of thumb. And this is for going out and creating cool content. This is not for flight instruction. Like I said earlier, I like to keep that down to like 5 minutes for flight instruction and just throwing a camera in. I kind of separate that from creating content that we would use for marketing or for YouTube or storytelling, stuff like that. That's where I come up with that at least 2-time factor. Get all the cameras mounted, get them lined up the way we want them, make sure we have the right angles, and then, go fly. Sometimes it's a lot more than 2 times.
Well, I think you just made a very important distinction there. What I think I heard you say was that for flight instruction, a single camera is good enough because it captures what we're looking to do. That takes a lot less time. However, if we're doing something fancy that we want to look great on YouTube, we probably have multiple cameras in the airplane, and that takes a lot more time. Is that kind of the difference?
Exactly. And I separate those two very distinctly as far as the mission objective, what we're doing, and how much time I have available. If I have 2 hours available before sunset and I just want to go enjoy a nice flight, I don't set up cameras. And if someone asks me, can we set up cameras? My answer is no, because we don't have enough time available and we're going to get ourselves in a time crunch if we do that.
And I agree. I think a single camera for flight instruction is totally adequate. Certainly my experience was just running audio most of the time was adequate, but your example was good where it really helped to show that the pilot was not doing what the pilot thought that he was doing. And so having the audio matched up made a lot of sense. I'm curious, when you're doing just a single camera for flight instruction, what's the view of that camera? Where do you mount it? What are you looking to capture in the camera?
The view that I like for that is just the over the shoulder view. And we have multiple ways to get that. If I can't get over the shoulder, I like to get just the instrument panel and out through the windscreen so that we get a rough idea of the attitude of the aircraft and how that aligns with the instrumentation so that we can see airspeed, attitude, altitude, and outside. And we can start correlating that pilot's view to kind of the data that we're looking at or the audio. And my goal with the camera, yes, the audio is at least as valuable as the video, and a lot of arguments that it's more valuable, but we can make it to where it's, if you look at the camera as the audio recording device, it doesn't take hardly any more effort to get the video too. So we have several mounts that make that really easy. One, our suction cup is our main mount that we use for that. And it's really versatile. It works in almost any aircraft. And we have one that we've specialized for flying so that as you climb, the air pressure doesn't cause it to fall off. So it has a little pump on it so you can pump it up. Nice arm so that you can adjust it and get a good angle, whether you put it on a side window, overhead, or you can put it on the windshield itself and back it off so that it's looking at the instrument panel and out the front. All of those are quick and easy to do and easy to get an audio cable plugged in as well.
Yeah, I want to talk in more detail about the different mounts in a moment, but let me ask you about something that I see all the time, which is video that has been shot from cameras that are obviously mounted on the outside of the aircraft. I'm suspecting that many of them are violating an FAR, a Federal Aviation regulation, when they do that. Tell us about the regulations relating to mounting cameras on airplanes and how you can do it legally.
Absolutely. So we kind of pioneered how to do it legally back in 2014 or earlier than that. But in 2014, I have a memo from the FAA stating that a camera can be mounted as a minor alteration. And on our website, we have the AMP's Guide to Mounting Cameras. And what the FAA determined, what we worked with them to determine, because at the time I was trying to decide whether we needed an STC to mount cameras or how we could do it properly. I'm an A&P IA myself, so I want to make sure we were doing this right. And that memo is posted on our website as well. But what we determined is that it can be done as a minor alteration, which means that any A&P can make a logbook entry on a certified aircraft as long as they determine that the mount does not adversely affect structural integrity, aerodynamics, or weight and balance. So that really puts it on the A&P to determine, is this camera mounted properly and is it mounted in a safe way? Some of the things we want to avoid are getting in front of a control surface in any way that the camera, if it comes loose or if it moves, could jam the control surface. Any chance that it could go into a propeller or turbine intake is very bad for obvious reasons. And then just for quality of footage, I keep it out of the slipstream of a propeller. So because the airflow is accelerated so much, you're going to get more vibration and your footage is usually going to be garbage if you have it, even if it's behind the propeller, like on the belly, right behind a cowling screw or something like that. And then what we've done is we have created an ecosystem of mounts based on this top piece here, which I designed similar to the top of a camera tripod. I call it a ball head. So it allows you to adjust the camera, but what I've done is beef it up, make it out of stainless steel, and I've tested it up to 250 knots indicated airspeed. And I like to point out the difference in indicated airspeed and ground speed. I know it should be obvious for most pilots, but this is 250 knots on your airspeed indicator. Ground speed is a completely different thing with the amount of air flowing over the camera. So we've calculated the drag and made sure that this mount is robust enough to hold a GoPro-sized camera at up to 250 knots without moving. The way it works, we have several different attachment methods, but they all work with the same top piece. So we have what I call a spud, which is a stainless steel piece here that you can remove a screw and then a machine screw, and then you put a slightly longer, quarter-inch longer machine screw back through this. So this mounts onto the aircraft surface, and now you can put the camera on, aim it, and have a secure mount. We also have, this is what I call our tie-down mount. So a tie-down makes a great location for a camera. It's structurally sound, usually not in the way of any control surface. You want to double check that. Like most aircraft have one on the tail underneath, and that makes a great location because if anything were to go wrong with the camera, it falls free of the aircraft or it doesn't encumber the aircraft at all. So this you can add to almost any tie-down mount quickly. It's got a little handle here that allows it to clamp down. Basically works like a clamp, gives you a spot to mount the camera. And then we have our strut clamp, which adjusts from anything from a J3 Cub up to a Caravan by adjusting the width of the front here. And then we have a really strong rubber strap that goes around the back of the strut, holds it nice and tight. We've never had the strap even come close to failing. It's significantly over-engineered. And that gives you the same spud piece on a strut, which is obviously common on high-wing aircraft. So we wanted to make a ecosystem of mounts that work on 95% of the airplanes out there, rather than focusing on this is your Super Cub rear handle mount, because that just gets too specific and it's honestly not all that useful, other than if you happen to have a Super Cub with that mount, then that's cool, you've got it. But we want to make something that works on almost everything. And the other thing I really like to point out to people is do not tether your camera to the airplane, because your $400 camera, if it happens to come loose and it's tethered, can and will do $40,000 worth of damage to your aircraft by beating into it. Also, it becomes a safety issue because it could, at that point, start putting holes in the airplane, depending on where it is, fuel tanks, etc. You really don't want that. Your camera should be secured in a manner that it's not going to fall off. But if it were to fall off, you want it to fall free and clear of the aircraft. And you want to make sure you're not flying over anywhere where that could cause a problem. If you use our systems properly, you don't have to worry about the camera coming off. But every time I see a camera tethered, I cringe. And I've had plenty of emails from customers where I've seen the aftermath of a tethered camera and just go, that's going to be expensive. So, and I'm glad that it worked out and you're back on the ground and everything was fine. But I really like to emphasize that as well on talks like this.
Okay, great overview. Let me go back to the installation requirements with the FAA. You've described three different kinds of mounts. Certainly the first one, the Spud Mount, sounds like it's relatively permanent in the sense that you put that Spud on and you're going to leave it there even for flights when you're not going to use the camera. Is that correct? Or are you going to take that off when you're not using the camera?
You can leave it there. That is the intent. It's not hard to take off, but once you have it signed off and you've gone through the process of determining it's a minor alteration, it's easiest just to leave the Spud on the aircraft. It doesn't impact anything. It's smaller than, a tie down on the airplane. So most of the time we just leave them on the airplane unless there's a reason to take it off.
Understood. So it's fairly small. It's not going to affect any of the aerodynamics of the airplane. And what if I do remove a mount that's been signed off and then I want to put it back on a month later? Do I then need a mechanic to sign it off again?
You do. You will need that signature on and off the airplane. Now, if you develop a relationship with the mechanic that signed it off originally, most of us develop relationships with the mechanics we work with, it would be less than 60 seconds of labor to put the mount back on the airplane. So most likely they're going to be pretty easy to work with on that.
Okay. And then for each time the mechanic signs this off, let's say we're putting it on and putting it off and so on. Maybe it's, for example, the tie down ring mount. And of course, I need that mount. I need to tie my rope to that every time I'm done. So the mount has to come off. What kinds of notation is the mechanic? What are they attesting to? What are the words they're using in the logbook for that?
Let me back up a bit and point out that the A&P signature or the sign off, there's not an actual regulation that we've been able to find to point our finger to, but a generally accepted rule of thumb is if the mount requires a tool to install it, then we need an A&P signature. If it does not, then we don't. So the tie down mount and the strut clamp neither require a tool. So we have been successful in installing and uninstalling those without an A&P signature. When we install the Spud with a screwdriver and permanently attach it to the aircraft, then that's where we look for the A&P signature and the minor alteration.
Wow. That's a very important distinction I hadn't understood. I had thought that we would require a mechanic sign off every time something was attached. And what you're saying, if it's a strut clamp that you can screw on by hand, if you will, or the tie down ring mount that you also has a handle that you can push down with your hand, for those, no sign off is required ever?
Correct. Like I said, there is not a regulation that differentiates between the two, but that's been a generally accepted rule of thumb. And we've had success with that with the FAA. That doesn't mean that they could change their interpretation tomorrow. If you want to go with the most conservative interpretation, then an A&P sign off on everything will completely cover you. But for the past 13 years that we've been dealing with these externally mounted cameras, that rule of thumb has served us well, and multiple FAA inspectors have agreed with me on that.
That's great. That's good to know. So that really does open up the possibilities for shooting video without having to get an A&P to sign off things. That's great.
Correct. We try to design our mounts to be as quick and easy to install and toolless. That being one of the reasons. The other reason is we just like to make things easy.
What other tips do you have in general for people who are shooting video from their aircraft?
A big tip is practice with your equipment and have some patience. Realize that if you're trying to create content for users to consume as entertainment, there's a lot of skill and practice involved in that. So just like we wouldn't go out and try and fly a jet on our first flight, start small and work up. Start with one camera, master one camera before you go to 4. And then the other monumental shift in technology has been the vibration cancellation software that came out around 2016. The Hypersmooth is what GoPro calls it. Most manufacturers have a different name for it or have a name for it. But being able to stabilize footage has been revolutionary for aircraft filming. So you want to make sure you get a camera that has the ability to digitally stabilize the footage, and it'll make your life much easier as far as what we call jello and footage, which is kind of becoming an old thing, but that used to make mounting cameras much more difficult.
Another thing I found is I need to set aside time the night before I'm flying just to pre-flight my cameras.
Exactly.
Which is to say, I've got to go through and make sure all the batteries are charged. I've got to pull out the memory card, make sure that I've saved whatever files are on it that I need, so that I've got a clean, newly formatted, empty memory card when I start my filming the next day, and just basically take care of all that stuff ahead of time, set the date and time. Certainly it's nice when you've got multiple cameras running in the airplane. If the date and time is synchronized correctly on all the cameras, it helps a little bit when you go to line up that footage later on.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You have to pre-flight your camera system, and that is a skill set you have to develop and work into. We do make kits that try to make that easy as possible. Our Cockpit Kit contains everything you need and tries to keep it in a logical format so that it makes the process a little easier, but there's still a process there.
We've talked about some of the different camera mounts that you sell, and you've also just started to mention the Cockpit Kit. Tell us a little bit more about these products or other products that you also offer.
Yeah, so we try to group them into logical groupings, but like our Cockpit Kit is kind of everything you need to film in the cockpit. It's that kit that you should buy if you're learning to fly and you go, hey, this makes sense. I agree. I think filming my flights will make it more efficient. So you buy that kit. It's a suction cup and an arm. We make filters that help remove the propeller distortion from the video. So call it window shading, propeller distortion. It's these weird lines you get. It's a result of the sensor. I won't go into the science as to why that happens, but it does kind of ruin your video. So we make some filters that go on the camera. They're neutral density filters, and they will eliminate that, make your video look a lot better. So those come in the kit. And then most importantly is the audio cable to capture everything you hear in your headset and put it in the video. I call that the other half of the story. And we make that for GoPro. We make it for smartphones, iPhones, and Androids. We make it for Insta360. We have a whole multitude of cameras we support. And on our website, we clearly spell out which cameras go with which cable. And also, one of the things we really pride ourselves on is we're a really small company. If you call us, you're going to talk to a pilot. Everyone that works at the company is a pilot, and also into filming. So we're more than happy to help you out, get you set up. There are 3 of us, and we all love flying and we all love filming. So give us a call if you have any questions. We'll talk through it with you, get you set up, and get a package out the door to you.
Well, this has been great talking with you today, Patrick. Tell us where people go to find out more information about NflightCam.
Yeah, so our website's the best source, and that's www.n as in November, just one letter, the word flightcam.com. So nflightcam.com. There's no I in front of the N.
And you had mentioned that you would put together a promo code for listeners. What is that?
Absolutely. It's real simple, Max. We're going to use your name, just MAX. If you put that in the coupon code when you check out, it'll save you 10%.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for doing that, and thanks for talking with us here today.
Absolutely.
And my thanks to Patrick for joining us here today. You can find more about his company at nflightcam.com. And I've also included a link in the show notes to their A&P's Guide to Mounting Cameras. And you can find the show notes at aviationnewstalk.com/347. Now, if you've enjoyed the show and have any comments, you can email me by going to aviationnewstalk.com and clicking on Contact at the top of the page. And if you're getting value from this show, well, please support it by going to aviationnewstalk.com/support. And of course, please tell all of your friends about this show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.
You can always go around. If it don't look right coming down, don't wait until your side's maybe sliding upside down.